Three movies I saw in the last year: The Color Purple, The Book of Clarence, and The American Society of Magical Negroes. They all flopped at the box office, and I want to talk about why. The Book of Clarence with Lakeith Stanfield, The American Society of Magical Negroes featuring David Allen Greer and Justice Smith, and The Color Purple musical with Taraji P. Henson and Fantasia Barrino. These films should have had everything going for them, right? Wrong. The box office numbers came in and they were good and terrible.
That boy is good. Good and terrible.
So what happened? Is it the quality of the films? Was it the content or the appeal? The real culprit? Marketing. Specifically how these films were marketed, and more importantly, who they're marketed to. Most films with all Black cast, diverse cast, are usually exclusively marketed to Black audiences. And while that might seem logical at first, it's actually a huge problem because it severely limits the potential audience for those films. Think about this. When you're scrolling through social media or watching TV, how often do you see ads for films if you're not a part of the perceived demographic? Probably not much. That's because the marketing teams are stuck in this idea that people really only want to see themselves and not experiences that they're unfamiliar with. They're not completely wrong. So let's break it down with The Book of Clarence. This movie had Lakeith Stanfield, Jay-Z as an executive producer, a $40 million budget, and a fairly sacrilegious premise. It was only making $6.2 million at the box office, and that is a massive loss, as a big part because of how it was marketed. The cast did interviews on platforms like BET, The Tamron Hall Show, and Good Morning America, which do have pretty large reach. But appearing on lesser-known platforms geared towards Black audiences only meant it was geared towards a smaller subquadrant. It also was unclear if the film was a faith-based movie or a satire. So now the church crowd's offended, the atheists are intrigued, and the agnostics are not moved enough to care.
You now believe in Jesus?
Yes, basically.
But you know what it didn't do? Consistent social engagement with its target audience. For example, the teaser trailer and official trailer dropped 3 months apart with no significant marketing between the two drops. So 6.2 million at the box office means it was not effective in pulling people in. The Color Purple faced similar issues but had the benefit of being an original classic in the Black film canon. This was a musical adaptation with a production cost between $90 million to $100 million. It needed $200 million to earn some sort of profit, but it only grossed $67.5 million worldwide. What went wrong? Well, despite a strong opening on Christmas Day, I even went and saw it then, ticket sales dropped dramatically in the second weekend. And again, a lot of this comes down to marketing and understanding the audience. As a theater girly myself, I initially had a very mixed reaction to this coming out, and I had seen the original Color Purple more times than I can count, with Whoopi's performance alongside the rest of the cast as remarkable. Now, regardless of your feelings on the subject matter of the film, there's no denying the powerhouse talent that it exposed. But the Alice Walker book in 1982, turned movie in 1985, turned Broadway musical in 2005, turned movie musical, felt like overkill. The biggest challenge I perceived was an obvious one. No one wanted this movie, especially as a musical. Some people thought this was a remake, and they really weren't interested in seeing that, considering it had a man-hating historical fiction passed off as true. But if you were interested, you may have found the singing and dancing very uncomfortable for the heavy tone of that piece. So what The Color Purple suffered from is connected to multiple issues, including a marketing campaign that hid the fact that it was a musical and failed to engage the younger generation. It's not that TCP had no value, but it was a misfire in every direction and with every target group because it didn't take into account how this generation would perceive that movie. It also collided into this PR nightmare with the biggest stars complaining of poor treatment on set and unsafe working conditions. Yikes. But no film, in my opinion, biffed it quite as hard as The American Society of Magical Negroes, managing to piss off even the non-Black people before it even opened in theaters.
What's the most dangerous animal on the planet?
The shark.
White people, when they feel uncomfortable.
The trailer got a ton of negative responses because some people felt that it was pandering to white audiences or that it was shoving a woke agenda down everyone's throats, while not even being remotely funny or well-written. And though we're not going to dive too deep into the content of these movies, Magical Negroes was such a misfire from a storytelling standpoint, I don't blame people for being upset. I spent nearly 2 hours watching that story just devolve into nothing with no real payoff. So clearly, that type of approach creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. Studios assume that diverse or black movies with black cast should only be marketed to niche quadrants. Then when the films don't perform well, they can use that as further proof that these films do not have a wide appeal. And it's a vicious cycle that's not just hurting individual films, but future investment. But it's not like diverse movies are the only ones to flop, and there have been black films that broke this mold and achieved mainstream success. By treating films as great stories that people can enjoy regardless of their race or background, there's a lot more opportunity for breakout hits. Now, as soon as we start talking about unsuccessful movies, someone always comments, well, what about Black Panther? And yes, Black Panther made over $1.3 billion worldwide. Obviously, Marvel and Disney have fans globally, and they also have a $200 million production budget with an additional $170 million that they had for marketing. They didn't just stick to platforms watched by Black audiences, though. They really went big with Super Bowl ads, international premieres, partnerships with major brands, and the result, a cultural phenomenon that became a global blockbuster hit. But Black Panther had so much money behind it, so let's talk more about a smaller budget, like Get Out. Jordan Peele's horror masterpiece cost just $4.5 million to make and grossed over $255 million worldwide. The Ticket was a great story paired with very smart marketing. Universal Pictures didn't market it as a black film. It was a psychological thriller that utilized real people's fears as the premise for the horror. The marketing campaign for Get Out was filled with all these mysterious, intriguing visuals that got everybody talking, and they hosted special screenings for influencers across community. They even had a Super Bowl spot that played up the film's very unsettling vibe without giving too much away. And that made sure that people of all backgrounds were lining up to see this film. So the case could be made that those two are big budget outliers with studio backing. But what about smaller, more culturally specific films? Okay, Moonlight. It had a budget of just $1.5 million, went on to gross over $65 million worldwide, and win Best Picture at the Oscars.
I'm afraid they read the wrong thing.
This is not a joke. Moonlight has won Best Picture. Moonlight, Best Picture.
It's a perfect example of how a film maintains cultural authenticity while appealing to a wider audience. The marketing team really focused on the universal themes of the story: identity, love, coming of age. A lot of people didn't even really know what it was about, but they didn't shy away from the fact that it was a Black queer story. They also didn't limit their marketing to just those communities. They used film festivals to build buzz. They got prominent critics talking about the film, and they leveraged social media so well that it created a word-of-mouth buzz. Because great stories, well told, can resonate with anyone. So here's the million-dollar question. If it's been done before and done well, why isn't it happening more often? Besides the obvious storytelling problems, because there were many. Let's face it, there are terribly done blockbuster films all the time with holes all over the script that are still commercially successful. So what's stopping studios from applying the same strategies to more diverse films?
That's a stereotype.
Terrible stereotype.
She means stereotype.
A stereotype much?
When I was still auditioning as an actor, my acting coach used to say that film people lack imagination. So industry folks really have a hard time thinking outside the box. It's not like theater. They are thinking in dollars and cents, not really creativity and artistry, unless it's going to line their pockets. So putting people in boxes or quadrants is the most predictable way forward to get a return. That's why in 2025, there's still a long-held belief that Black people are more valuable in entertainment spaces. Obviously, Black culture dominates in music, fashion, and trends, as we are consistently the tastemakers for the culture, but we keep seeing the same type of archetypes go mainstream, which is actually hurting our push for better, more nuanced representation. Making movies that get people talking, good or bad, the formula is one that industry people recognize and they see dollar signs. So why not make a self-referential film that explains Blackness to white people, of course? That's a joke. Don't do that. The American Society of Magical Negroes learned their lesson when they got people talking. When the marketing for that movie leaned into the magical Negro, referring to the trope where Black characters exist to help white protagonists, it initially tried to subvert it. But the movie had people so angry before it even hit theaters. In fact, it brought people together in sheer hate watches for the film. And the biggest thing that I peeped is how that movie had way too many genres without committing to any of them. Spoiler alert. The Magical Negroes are tasked with making white people happy so that Black people will feel safe. What did I just read? And to no surprise to anyone, it was pulled within 3 weeks from theaters for low ticket sales. But that doesn't explain the book of Clarence that went so outside of traditional stories, it kind of missed everyone. As a Christian, I was confused until maybe the last scene as to whether this was actually blasphemous. And I wasn't offended, I was just confused. It was giving like blasphemy light. Now, it did remind me of Honk for Jesus in that it was trying to be provocative to drive people to the theaters or to offend them enough to tweet about it, but it was missing that connective tissue. It just felt like a vignette series of scenes, and it didn't move me in any real way, especially considering, spoiler alert, a false messiah who comes to terms with who he is as a child of God, or as God within as the subject matter. Though I think it would have been interesting to more people if it had been pushed out on social media in a clearer way. So here's the $100 million question. Are studios leaving money on the table by not investing in broader marketing for diverse films? Obviously, I think the answer is a resounding yes. And I'm not alone in this. A 2021 McKinsey report says that Hollywood could gain an additional $10 billion, yes, billion with a B, annually by improving diverse representation, Black representation in film. Now, that's a lot of money left on the table, and to keep it a buck with y'all, it's actually unfair that Black films cannot afford to flop. It's rare that a Black film director or producer has a movie not do well, and then they secure future funding. It's understandable, but it's frustrating because Black movies are already starting with certain handicaps in budget, marketing, and strategy. And by the way, if you feel like that is a racial take, argue with your mama, because that is actually backed up with facts and stats. So let's talk solutions. How can we reimagine marketing for Black cinema, for diverse films, for new film concepts? Studio heads are paying attention to the majority, okay? Majority rules here, not a small minority that are begging for better storytelling. And I can already feel those of you in the comments that are gonna come in saying, we don't want more woke movies. Child, me either. I am not looking for diversity swaps or remakes of other films because it's inauthentic and it's forced. But studios do pay attention to what we watch, what we listen to, what we pay for, what we buy into. If we want studios to recognize that investing in broader, more innovative marketing for all films isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business, then we gotta change our mindsets. We need a recognition that stories are human stories with universal themes that can resonate with everyone. Now, one thing I plan to do is support movies, diverse casts, crews, unique stories, sci-fi thrillers, new stuff. It doesn't have to always be high production value or laced with celebrities all the time, but it does have to be a good story. By showing up for good films, demanding better marketing, we can very well encourage the media to change. Now, I will say I'm super thankful to be back on YouTube chatting about all of these things, but I also got to shout out my Patreon family. Shout outs to them because they really do encourage me when it comes to being a more digested, more thoughtful consumer. And that's really what the crux of the channel is all about. So if you want to join the Patreon, if you want to join channel memberships, which I just recently opened up and finally figured out, you can totally do that down in the description box below. But until next time, I will see you later. Bye now.